The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 22. Proteus gets a few answers from Window and learns that Window doesn't know it all. Proteus awakened. He felt lonesome, which was silly, he thought. Still, he had that crazy dream about all those people, and he missed some of them. The girl called Maha, for instance. He grinned, rubbing his eyes to get the sleep out of them. She was so splendidly insolent, in a way. Well, maybe not insolent, but actually, though he tried to remember it, most of the dream was disappearing. Wait, he sat up, feeling that he was about to recall something very important, but he lost it. Anyhow, he thought, it was reality that counted, and he had a million questions for Window. The tellers, for example. How strange that this second dig wasn't discovered from above. It was protected by the cliffs to some degree, but it wasn't underground. And Window said nothing about the rest of the planet. Was it populated? And why had Window been so certain that search parties wouldn't find him here? What was there to stop them? Something about the dream itself made him determined to get some definite answers. He got up and went barefoot, looking for Window. He was also ravenous, so he went to the eating hall first. He kept wanting to call it an eating nodule. Window was there, and Proteus sat down beside him. "You're gaining weight," Window said. "Must be our sun and food." Proteus grinned. "My stomach's finally getting used to the bulk instead of synthetics." "Window, where did your people learn to grow all this food? Any of it?" "It's given," Window said, with a half-smile. "Given? It's already here. The earth produces it. We harvest it and plant the seeds that the earth gives, and cultivate the soil. What about the rest of the planet? It's in pretty poor shape. It's been stripped, but it's recovering, now that most of the people are gone. Even the animals are coming back. There's no question, though, that this particular area is amazingly productive." Window spoke slowly, and Proteus thought that he was holding something back. He was tempted to pursue the subject further, but there were too many other questions on his mind. "Why don't the floaters know about this dig?" Proteus asked. "They know all about the first one." Window stood up. "We don't know," he said. "You tell me." "You don't know? You're joking, aren't you? With all of your knowledge, you don't know? You can't even get in here except for the way we took you in, through the pyramid," Window said. "We suspect there may be other secret entrances, but we haven't found any. No animals come in either, unless we bring them. Of course, the cliffs make a natural barrier, and there aren't that many animals yet, still." He lowered his voice, almost in embarrassment. "A few times we saw planes go over. We thought for sure we'd been discovered, but nothing happened. The truth is that this place should be easy enough to spot from the air, yet it escapes the observation cameras that are aimed constantly at the earth from the floating city, and we don't know why. Maybe the floaters do know, but aren't letting on," Proteus said. Window shook his head. "We're sure they don't." "Well, maybe you can't answer my next question either, then. I never thought of that. but your abilities seem shared to some extent by all of the people here. Where did they come from? We've developed them, Window said. Living close to the earth seemed to arouse long-forgotten tendencies in us, for one thing. We tried to encourage the earth to come to life again. After everyone left, we explored the land as well as we could. This area was the least damaged, the most fertile. I'm second generation. A few, like Story, are third. This work was begun by our fathers. But I'll have to show you something in order to really answer your question. Come with me. Window took Proteus to another building he hadn't been in earlier. Here's a videotaped record of the day the tellers first found this place, Window said. The narrator is Joel Bradwick. He was my father's brother. At the time, he was 57. He lived to be a hearty 84. The cameraman is Story's grandfather. One of the reasons I've taken such an interest in her development. Here we go. He darkened the room, and he and Proteus sat down to watch. Window said, actually, after they found the valley, they went back for the cameras and so forth. Bradwick waited here. When this video begins, the other members of the party had just returned. The video glimmered. Incredible, Bradwick said. Watching, Proteus caught his breath, feeling that he was intruding. He was embarrassed for Bradwick, a man long dead. He reminded himself. But Bradwick was so obviously awed. He looked full face at the camera and said, I've never seen anything like this in my life before. He was so moved that his eyes looked bleary. There was sweat on his forehead. His thick, mobile lips seemed uncontrolled. It's just chance that we came upon this place, he said. God knows how long it's been here. He paused. I'm going to sit on this rock and narrate while the camera roams the nearby area. I've been here alone while the rest of the party went back for some equipment, and I've discovered some astonishing things. This time the camera showed him full figure, and Proteus saw that he limped and was taller than the earlier shots made him appear. Bradwick went on, excitedly explaining the video scenes. This whole valley is surrounded by those high cliffs. You couldn't climb them. It's impossible. So we must have gone under them through the door we found at the first dig. And we thought that we had a find there. 20th and 21st century ruins. But this is the greatest archaeological discovery of the century, any century. The video showed the wide expanse of sky, then moved in for a shot of the cliff walls. The cliffs incline forward as if on purpose, to protect the valley and keep it hidden, Bradwick said. But more than that, the ancient drawings and signs on the cliff walls are in excellent condition, which is amazing when you realize that this place isn't underground. The later ruins at the other dig are in far worse shape. I found records stored on blocks of stone here, thousands of them, in inner rooms. Who knows what they say, or if we'll be able to decipher them. The camera took a close-up shot of one cliff section, and involuntarily Proteus yelled out. "What is it?" Window asked. "I don't know. Can you hold that shot?" "Of course." Proteus stared. A small section of the wall held his eye. On it the following appeared. 2 rows of figures, some look like symbols, some look like numbers. Then I'll have to make a video of that. Window said again, Proteus, what is it? I just don't know, Proteus answered. My pulses are really racing. I'm so excited. Yet I can't tell you exactly what it is, because I don't know. But I had the wildest dream of my life last night, and the dream has something to do with those symbols. I only remember a little. There was a girl in it, a black girl. It struck me as odd, since stories spoke about a black girl, and then you saw a beautiful girl with black skin the day that the symbol appeared on the tile. And in the dream someone was giving translations of ancient verse. When I saw those symbols just now, I thought that... Proteus broke off, embarrassed. Then he continued, almost despite himself. Well, I thought that I knew what the symbols meant, or rather I thought I saw them translated into words of a sort, but in a different language. Yet I've seen symbols like that on the cliff walls here and never felt anything like that. Maybe you tuned into some kind of unconscious knowledge in your dream, Window said. That's quite possible, you know. No, I really think that I just had the dream because that stupid symbol on the tile bothered me so. The dream might have been an imaginative solution to the question I had or something. Do you want me to go on with the tape? Window asked. Proteus nodded. Yes, go ahead with it. Words can't describe this place, Bradwick said. The camera showed the entrance to the courtyard and played over the tiles. How this place remained undiscovered through the centuries, I just don't understand it. Bradwick shook his head. Until the end of the 21st century, this planet was literally covered with people. Yet no records mention this place. The ruins are obviously ancient, yet they're right here, out in plain sight, with no later ruins on top. It just doesn't make sense. Bradwick's voice was so filled with amazement that it was shaking. It's terribly difficult to recapture the sense of wonder those men felt when they found this place, Window said. That's why these films are so valuable, to remind us. We're so used to it here. I just don't get it, Proteus said. No later ruins? I don't suppose that somebody dug these out from under later ones. Not unless they made them disappear completely, Window answered. And there's no evidence of anything else having been here. The floaters have complete records of the entire Earth, Proteus said. Are you sure that... Window interrupted, smiling. Our men went over all those records. There were various towns and small cities here, particularly in the last centuries of Earth's habitation, and no ruins of them in this particular spot. The first dig checks out perfectly, for example. There are a few possible explanations, but they don't hold up. Remember, he continued, buildings in the later centuries weren't made to last, for one thing. Civilization was remaking itself, tearing itself down at an ever-increasing rate and rebuilding. They destroyed a good deal of evidence of their past, so that only records or pictures remained. The whole so-called urban renewal era began in a small way, but it ended up so that few cities were ever in decent shape or in stages of completion at any given time. They ripped down the old buildings to put up newer ones to house the greater numbers of people. But the new buildings seldom lasted over 10 years. Material got low, until finally there was nothing else to do. They left for the floating cities, and these took nearly a century to complete. But Earth's been under observation all this time, Proteus said. Yes, but the race has concentrated all its attention and energy on off-Earth survival. Actually, there haven't been any real overall systematic explorations of the planet since man left. For so long it was just stripped bare. They had to let it rest. Portions are still scarred, maybe permanently, by radioactivity from the nuclear skirmishes of the early 21st century. Even many of the old famous ruins were destroyed. The Greek and Roman edifices are completely gone, for example. But here, I'll switch the video back. The pictures came into focus. Bradwick said, "The thing is, these ruins have no right to be here. You get the insane feeling that they're fresh. They're ancient, of course, but you think in terms of freshly created age, or some such. And they're too complete." As Bradwick spoke, the camera ranged around the area once more. The 3 pyramids came into view. "That middle one is the one we emerged from when we got here," Window said. Bradwick's own voice was more controlled now. A touch of resolution hardened his tone. "It's occurred to us that we might be able to keep this our secret," he said. "We've declared the first small dig, but so far no one knows about this place to our knowledge. There's an unequaled opportunity for me and my entire party. We could spend our lives here deciphering what we find." He paused, then smiled ruefully. "I really don't know how we could get away with it, but the idea is worth considering. Women rule the floating cities now with an iron hand. Men have the least important jobs. It's only because this type of exploration is low on the priority list that no one bothers us. They think there's nothing valuable to be found. If they discover the importance of our finding, they'll take it completely out of our hands." Bradwick looked away from the camera as if unwilling to meet the eye of any subsequent observers of the film. "This may be a rationalization," he said, "but the race needs one spot on Earth where maybe it could start over. One spot where we can be Earthlings, not Earthmen or Earthwomen, but Earthlings. This place could present us with the opportunity to begin a small living experiment of our own." Broderick's voice was unsteady again. He said, "It's almost as if we're led here." Window stopped the soundtrack. "So that's what they ended up doing," he said. "It took all kinds of subterfuge, though hardly anyone comes down to the surface as a rule. Planes are obsolete, no good for the floaters above atmosphere conditions, though a few are stored on Earth, and copters are carried in the sky elevators for use here when necessary. But still, both have gone over, and still this place remains secret." He added soberly, "That's why you put us in such a predicament. We didn't want any attention drawn to this area at all, much less a search party looking for a citizen from one of its floating cities. They must think you're dead by now." Proteus listened, but he wiggled uncomfortably in his chair. Portions of the dream kept returning, particularly the image of Maha. He colored and looked away because the mental picture of her was so vivid. He realized that he wanted to meet her again, which was really impossible, he thought, because the whole thing had only been a dream. Some of his thoughts were so confusing that he tried to keep them even from himself. He'd always wanted to be a girl because they had the positions of power. and the girl in the dream was exactly the kind of girl he would have liked to be, for instance. On the other hand, he wanted her in a way a male was supposed to want a woman, and in the way he didn't want Story, though he thought that he should. The half-buried thoughts brought up another that surfaced suddenly, with strong emotional vitality. "I just remembered something," he said. "In the dream, it was the girl who made the symbol in the tile, and she was supposed to live in this particular spot right here, but back in the past when it was all new." The memory almost made him dizzy, because if this was so, then the girl in the dream was imaginary, beyond all doubt, and he'd never see her again. Either that, or she'd been dead for centuries. How could she have seemed so alive? How could the dream have been so real? "I just don't understand it," he said. Windows smiled sympathetically. "You had a dream that explained something that had worried you," he said. "Natural enough. And at your age, so is a dream girl. And you got the idea for her from my description of the girl I saw." "I know, but just suppose that I did see an actual girl and it was the same one. I know it's not really possible, because she'd be dead. But if you can see things in your visions, then why couldn't I in a dream?" Proteus frowned. "I don't believe it, but—" "You could, of course," Windows said, "but you haven't had the advantage of our training, so I suppose that didn't really occur to me. There. Now, what training? You've kept so much from me because you were afraid that I'd be found and tell it all. But since you don't even know how this place remains secret, I don't blame you. But I know something. I'm sure of it. That symbol on the tile is a key. That much is logical. There's a tie-in." "In what way?" Window looked troubled. He turned the video off and turned to Proteus. "Maybe Story's insights weren't distorted as much as I thought they were, and you are connected with all this. Tell me what you mean." For the craziest moment, Proteus felt that he should drop the whole thing, that he was dabbling in something dangerous, that this very instant had a significance beyond any he could imagine. "Well," Window asked, and Proteus looked the other way. "I've always liked you, Window," he said, "but I feel closer to you now than I ever have. I'm embarrassed, I guess. I have the funny feeling that what I'm going to say will change our lives, not just yours and mine and Story's, but the teller's too, as a group. Yet I don't know why I feel that way." "Just trust what you feel and say whatever it is," Window said. "That's just it," Proteus answered. "What I have to say just doesn't sound that important at all. Listen, this is all there is to it. The symbol on the tile appeared suddenly, no matter what we tell ourselves. It wasn't there, and then 10 minutes later it was, fresh and new yet ancient. And watching Broadwick on the video, I realized that in a bigger way, that's what happened with the whole dig. He found this place, obviously ancient, yet it hadn't been here earlier, or at least there were no records of it. The same thing as the new old symbol on the tile, only on a larger scale." Proteus lowered his voice. "But the important thing is that the tile symbol just happened a few days ago. So whatever is going on is still happening. No matter how crazy it sounds, the same thing just happened, and we almost saw it take place. If we'd been there at the precise moment the symbol appeared, what would we have seen? Window just stared at Proteus and didn't answer. Proteus rushed on, carried along by the intensity he was feeling. You've been here so long, Window, that you take lots of this for granted. But I don't. If you'd tell me about the training you've been speaking about, maybe it would help. Maybe I'd be able to see things that you can't just because of my different perspective. And you've kept so much from me. Where does your water supply come from? Where did you get the model for your civilization, small as it is? Window said, I'm afraid that I've relied on my inner seeing and ignored some things that were right in front of my physical eyes. Forgive me, Proteus. Maybe you can be of help. Not only that, Proteus said, but the tape showed me so many things. Those men began just the kind of experiment that I dreamed of for years as a boy, setting up natural life on Earth again. But you've really stopped asking the kind of questions those men asked. You've even stopped wondering why this place is still undiscovered. Only my question brought the matter to your attention again. But finding the answer is important. Window stood up. You're right, of course. In a way, maybe we're afraid of learning too much, he said slowly. A lot of this has to do with the training. We do many things because of it that we don't understand. We've been content to do them and let it go at that, I suppose. We began the training, or it was begun, about 3 years after the original party arrived, and in a most particular manner. Wait a minute, he said, and I'll show you another tape that you'll find even more informative. He paused, then continued, Proteus, your attitude had a lot to do with our secrecy, too. You were upset enough about your own situation, of course. Running away, the search, the new surroundings. But more than that, you were shocked by the little you did learn about us. Your reaction to Story was a good example. We knew you were uneasy about our abilities, and I saw that you weren't ready. I'm sorry I was so skeptical, Proteus said. I didn't mean to hurt Story's feelings. That's another thing, Window said. I had her to think about. She's in the middle of her training, and she's never come up against doubts like that before. They can be ruinous. But here, this is a later tape, 3 years later. The sound and video returned. This time Bradwick stood in a room lined with stone slabs piled sideways on rock ledges. Bradwick was obviously older, yet in another way he looked more vigorous. His voice had an added assurance. A baby about 2 years old sat on the stone floor. Just as the camera focused on Bradwick, the child began to toddle about. The date is June 17, 2211, Bradwick said. We all know it. I doubt we'll ever forget it. But our descendants might be interested. To save equipment, we only tape on the most important occasions, and this is one of them. Rather than tell what happened, I'm letting my brother's child unknowingly demonstrate. At least we hope he'll do what he did earlier in the day. Please watch. The cameras will be aimed at the baby. And just a hint here, We've left some of these stone tablets
loose
on the floor. We're hoping that the boy will go over to them as he did about an hour ago." Proteus watched expectantly and somewhat impatiently, while Window sat there smiling quietly and offering no information. The baby crawled about, half stood, fell down, got to his feet again, laughed, got up. "What does he do?" Proteus asked. "Just tell me so I'll know what to watch for." "There. All right. Watch closely now," Window said. The child saw the stone slabs, went over, sat down, and put his chubby hands flat on one of them. The camera came in closer, and Proteus could make out the symbols on the stone quite clearly. The baby seemed disappointed. He put his hands down flat on the symbols and scowled. Out of camera range, Broderick chuckled encouragingly. Proteus almost snapped. "Be quiet." He'd completely forgotten about Broderick in his intentness. The child turned, yelled, "Da!" and
grinned
apparently at Broderick. "What does he do?" Proteus demanded. Then he bit his lips, staring. While he turned to look at Window, the baby had returned to the stone tablet. Now the camera zoomed in. The small fingers were clumsily following the outlines of the symbols. Proteus noticed that the signs themselves were larger and more pronounced than the others he'd seen. At the same time, the baby laughed with delight. When his fingers ran off the symbols, he stopped, looking disappointed again and ready to cry. This happened twice. Then, whether his fingers just happened to return to the symbols or what, the baby seemed to be... Proteus turned, startled, to Window. "What's happening?" "He looks as if he's listening through his fingers, or hears something through them." But before Proteus finished speaking, the baby stood up unsteadily and then went back to the floor, this time with his ear to the stone. Nothing happened. The child looked outraged. There was a rich, loud laugh, Broderick's. "Just exactly what he did earlier," Broderick said. "Shh," Proteus said, and Window laughed. The baby fingered the symbols again and began jabbering excitedly, as if he was trying to repeat sounds he was hearing through his fingers from the stone. "Gibberish?" Proteus asked, not taking his eyes from the screen. "That's what Broderick thought at first, too. But watch now." Broderick squatted down beside the child. "My nephew has given a beautiful demonstration of his earlier performance," he said, with obvious pleasure. "I didn't know what to make of it in the beginning. He's often in here while I work. Curious, I examined the tablet and almost dismissed the whole thing, but something, his aura of discovery, maybe, wouldn't let me. What did he find so fascinating? Then I thought of repeating his actual motions." Broderick paused significantly, then looked directly at the camera. "When fingered a certain way, these symbols give off sounds that are carried through the fingertips. In this case, the symbols themselves give off the vibrations. But there are other variations, as we've already discovered in the last hour or so." Window turned the sound off. "I can tell you this part," he said. "They were so excited that everyone tried fingering the symbols, of course. After several weeks, it was apparent that the tablets were arranged in a certain order. In the first series, for example, Simple pictures gave off an audible word that described the object shown. Later ones added the symbol so that you had the written versions. Proteus, what's wrong? Proteus stared white-faced at the screen. Turn up the sound, he said. Window turned up the volume. The screen showed the following. Again, these are symbols that I can't describe, that look like numbers and letters and stuff. Broderick was running his fingers over the symbols. In sounds, these come out like this, he said. Sa or ni ba tu am. It's impossible, Proteus cried. Proteus, what? Still watching the screen, Proteus said, Don't say anything. Just hear me out before I lose the thread of my thought, or think it over and decide that the whole thing is too ridiculous. Before you tell me any more about the training you undergo, let me tell you more about my dream and your people. Then tell me if I'm right or not. Your people discovered verses, too, that were supposed to carry truths from generation to generation. Some were for children, some for adults. And the cliff drawings are tied in here, too. I wouldn't be surprised if they gave off sounds in the same way. Proteus, that's all correct, Window said, staring at him. What else do you know? That's it. I don't know. I didn't know I knew that. Proteus was dazed himself. I thought it was just a dream, but those symbols looked so like the ones I saw last night that startled me on the first tape you showed me. But in my dream, someone told me what I just told you, or I saw it, or something. But I definitely recognized the sounds just now, the words or language, or whatever it is. Proteus paused, trying to remember more of the dream. There's something else important, but I'm not sure what it was. Something about the sounds themselves having the power to do things. That's entirely apart from their meaning. I just can't remember. Give yourself the suggestion that you will, and you will, Window said. But Proteus frowned. I've lost it. But I'm more excited than I've ever been in my life. You've got to let me take the training. Maybe we'll discover how this place has remained secret. You never know. But you have to send out expeditions to other parts of the planet. We have to. Suppose there are other places like this that we don't know about. They'd be hidden, too, from us, unless we find out what conceals this dig. You'll never know if there are others like it or not. Maybe there's several, for all we know, all waiting to set up new life on the surface of the earth. Maybe, Window said, but Proteus, don't be too excited. We may be the only ones, you know. What makes you think there may be others? This is an amazingly complex... I don't know, Proteus interrupted, but I'm sure that there are others, and I don't know how I know. In Chapter 22, Peace, Light, and Love, Aloha.